The first time I powered up the DoAll Model ML bandsaw, I noticed the speed indicator made a terrible racket and bounced. It was very inconsistent. And so it's time to get in there and figure out what's wrong. I started by removing the 4 screws that hold the band welder to the face of the machine. It's pretty nice. There's a little lip that supports it, and so you can actually remove the screws without the thing falling out. Once you get the 4 screws out, you kind of have to tilt it and lift and wrestle it out of the machine, and it's a bit awkward. It's a big motor with a big transformer, but I was able to lift it up, and the cord was long enough to put it up on the table. With a flashlight and an inspection mirror, I was able to get a glimpse of the speedometer cable where it hooks up to the indicator. The nut was just a little bit too stiff to get by hand, so I snaked a pair of pliers up there and was able to loosen it. These are left-handed, so they turn to the right or clockwise to loosen, so just keep that in mind. The cable has a clamp screwed to the casting, and so I loosened it up and tried to loosen the cable, and of course I promptly dropped the clamp down into the base of the machine, but I was able to get the cable pulled out, and there was a wire tie around the bundle. Needed to pull that off in preparation for separating the speedometer cable from the rest of the cables. Around the back side of the machine, it was much the same. There's a nut on the drive for the speedometer, and loosened it with a pair of pliers. You know, not crazy, just enough to loosen it. Don't want to mar it or leave any marks. But once it was loose, I was able to just take it off by hand. It was a little bit greasy and grimy in there, but it came off easily. And then it was just a matter of fishing it out of the casting, and I was a little bit concerned that it might drop into a place where it'd be hard to get at, but it turns out that hole goes almost straight up into the welder bay, and so it's very easy to feed everything back and forth, no problems. Don't need to put a snake in it or anything like that. You know, sometimes getting cables through castings can be tricky. I cleaned the cable and liner in the parts washer. Here I'm pulling the cable out of the liner. I gave it a good inspection, made sure there weren't any flat spots or damage. The cable looked good, so I went ahead and cleaned everything really well. It really just took a few minutes and some elbow grease. I then blew the liner out with some compressed air. You can see that I put a rag on the floor, and I'm standing on the end of the cable with my foot. This keeps it from flying around and catches the solvent instead of spreading it all over the shop. To lubricate the cable, I laid out some clean cardboard and began putting lithium grease on the cable. Kind of worked it in with my fingers and spun it as it went in. I snaked the cable into the back of the machine and then found my missing clamp and screw. So I removed the protective tape from the end of the cable and then lubricated it lightly with a little lithium grease and then put it back in. I reinstalled the cable and the clamp. Before reassembling everything, I decided to power up the machine and let it run for a little while so that I could hear the indicator. And initially it sounded pretty good, but it wasn't long and it was back to its old screeching and bouncing problem. So clearly the problem is not in the cable, but in the indicator. So I quickly pulled the indicator out of the machine so that I could get a better look at it. I'm not sure if I need to send it out to be repaired or if it's something I'll be able to do. On the bench you can hear how noisy the indicator is, even by hand. Based on the symptoms, I think I'm going to just try oiling it. Look for the brass cup plug, that's the oil port. I used a variety of O-ring picks to carefully remove the brass plug. It's very thin, so make sure that you don't pierce it when you're removing it. Once it's removed, you can remove the felt that's down underneath it. The felt absorbs oil. The felt was completely dry, and it absorbs oil and acts as a reservoir. And as the shaft warms up, oil is drawn down into the shaft and bore to keep it lubricated. So you want to make sure that the oil is saturated well. Here I put a drop of oil in, and already I can feel that the speedometer is in much better shape. I'm going to continue to fill this oil reservoir until it basically stops taking up oil. I don't want to overfill it so that I fill up the speedometer with oil, but a few drops is what it took, and it definitely made a world of difference. I used a drift to carefully push the brass cup plug back into the bore. It's a little bit tricky. It has to be perfectly straight, and you don't want to press it down too far because you just want to cap it. You don't want to push it down into the bore and compress the felt and squish all of your oil out.
Ready?
Mm-hmm. It's not bouncing.
Hmm?
It's not bouncing.
Yeah, look at that.
I think we're good.
Looks like success.